Some people might say I shouldn't be talking about this, but it seems to me that half the problem is men don't. Because today I'm saying a Labour MP's 30-year personal history of fighting for proper treatment of her own period problems should be a rallying call for better healthcare for women. But can any of us see that actually happening? Endometriosis is often a painful condition in which cells similar to those lining the womb grow elsewhere in the body, but it can take up to 9 years to get a diagnosis. Bassett Law Labour MP Jo White said it took 30 years for her to get the treatment she needed. She said she had to endure crises during that time because she could not tell other people what was happening because of social mores against talking about period problems. She was talking about it to highlight a new £1 million government investment in education about menstrual health, access to support, and work to tackle misinformation through the Women's Health Strategy. The idea is to make more women feel confident about talking about it in order to get GPs to refer them to the treatment they need much more quickly. I wonder whether it will work that way though, because it seems there may be another prejudice undermining better healthcare on issues that affect only women. The former Mrs. Mike often suggests that illnesses that affect only women would be treated and cured a lot quicker if they only affected men instead. She's implying sexism in medical priorities, and Jo White's story would seem to back it up, at least to a certain extent. I am a man, and I'm therefore unqualified to comment on this from personal experience, so I looked up some research instead. It suggests that women's health issues have historically been under-researched, under-diagnosed, and sometimes dismissed by medical systems. Whether that amounts to deliberate sexism is a matter of interpretation, but the pattern itself is well documented. Endometriosis is one of the strongest examples. It affects around 1 in 10 women, yet average diagnosis times in the UK have remained measured in years rather than months. If a condition affecting millions of people causes severe pain, infertility, lost working days, and repeated hospital visits, I think it's fair to ask why it took so long to become a major health care priority. Don't you? And the prejudice, or perception of it, isn't limited to just one condition. There is a whole list. Adenomyosis. This is often described as a sister condition to endometriosis, causing severe pain and heavy bleeding. It was long thought to affect mainly older women and has historically received far less attention than many conditions with comparable impacts on quality of life. Polycystic ovary syndrome, known as PCOS. This affects millions of women worldwide, yet many report years of struggling with symptoms before diagnosis. Research funding has often lagged behind the prevalence of the condition. We all know this one, menopause. For decades, menopausal symptoms have been trivialized as something women should simply endure. It is only relatively recently that there has been serious public discussion about the impact of menopause on employment, mental health, and quality of life. Pelvic pain disorders. Women reporting chronic pelvic pain are statistically more likely than men with chronic pain conditions to be told their symptoms are stress-related or psychological. Studies have found that, on average, women's pain reports are taken less seriously than men's. Heart disease. This is perhaps the most striking example because it is not exclusively female. For many years, the typical symptoms of a heart attack were based largely on male patients. Women often present differently and were consequently underdiagnosed or diagnosed later. Autoimmune diseases. Conditions like lupus and multiple sclerosis disproportionately affect women. Patients often describe long diagnostic journeys and skepticism from healthcare professionals before receiving a diagnosis. Ms. White didn't even receive a diagnosis of endometriosis. She just suffered debilitating symptoms for 30 years before obtaining effective treatment. Doesn't that suggest medical professionals tend to normalize female suffering associated with menstruation? My ex's observation echoes a famous comment, often attributed to multiple campaigners rather than any single source. And that is, if men experienced periods, period pain and endometriosis, there would be far more investment in solving them. It is impossible to prove the counterfactual, conditions that would have to be true for the statement to be valid, but there are some suggestive comparisons. For example, conditions affecting male sexual function have often attracted significant research funding and pharmaceutical investment. Treatments for erectile dysfunction emerged relatively quickly once the commercial incentives existed, whereas many common gynecological conditions still lack definitive cures. Critics argue that this reflects both market forces and historic gender biases in medicine. Ironically, some men face similar problems to women in discussing erectile dysfunction. If I experienced that particular issue, and I'm not saying I do, I'm not sure I would feel comfortable talking about it, given my society's social mores. I think a large part of the problem may be that people only equate medical conditions to pain that they have experienced. When I had cluster headaches, most of the people around me completely failed to understand what was happening to me. They said, "Oh, it's just the headache." That was a comment I heard most often from people who could not remotely imagine the enormity of the difference in pain levels between the two. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they unconsciously mapped my experience onto the nearest thing they knew themselves, and that made it seem much less harmful. So think of it this way. When somebody hears headache, they think of the mild to moderate headaches they've had. When they hear period pain, they think of what they have been told is a normal inconvenience. They assume the experience lies somewhere within familiar boundaries. But a cluster headache is not a headache in the ordinary sense. It is one of the worst, if not the absolute worst, kinds of pain a human being can experience. Likewise, severe endometriosis pain is not merely a bad period, but the language used to describe both conditions encourages people to underestimate them. I think that's one reason conditions affecting women have struggled for recognition. Menstruation is universal among women of reproductive age, so there has historically been a tendency to treat all menstrual suffering as part of the normal package. The question often wasn't how severe is the pain, but can you still function? Women were expected to carry on. You can see parallels everywhere, particularly these. It's just back pain. It's just anxiety. I had a conversation over the weekend in a pub, don't judge me, about the conditions for which people claim the disability benefit personal independence payment. It's just anxiety came up in that chat. The argument was that if you're just a bit anxious, you shouldn't be claiming the benefit, and I would agree with that. But the word just was doing a lot of work there, collapsing a huge range of severity into something that the person saying it could understand. Probably because he doesn't suffer panic attacks on a daily basis at the thought of having to do things that the rest of us consider to be everyday parts of life. In each case, endometriosis, cluster headaches, anxiety and panic, the gap is one of imagination. People assume they understand because these things are labelled with words they assume to mean a particular thing. In reality, they have no frame of reference for the severity of what the sufferer is experiencing. That's also why personal testimony, like Ms. White's, can be powerful. A woman saying, "It took 30 years before I got the treatment that I needed," forces people to confront the possibility that what they have been thinking of as an unpleasant but ordinary part of life may actually have been a serious medical problem all along. But I wonder, considering the way people say cluster headaches are just headaches, or regular panic attacks are just anxiety, I think it may still be a long time before women stop being told to quit complaining about a heavy period.